Play Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. And this week, Martin and I are tag teaming this episode, digging into 3 albums by the Wipers.
We've got 1980s Is This Real? We've got Youth of America, which was released in 1981, and Over the Edge, which came out 2 years later in 1983.
Yeah, for Kurt's list, there's not a lot of repeats. The last time we saw something like this was probably Kleenex's entire discography.
Yeah.
So obviously this band is pretty important to Kurt and also the Northwest music scene.
You can't go wrong with the Wipers putting out their 3 best albums on this list.
Wiping the floor with them.
Exactly what I said about Kleenex. Like, what better band to just put their entire discography on your list? Like, I'm with it.
Yeah. Well, you're going to hear a lot more from us, so let's get right into it. Here is our story on 3 albums from the Wipers.
When it comes to the foundation of the Pacific Northwest punk scene, there are a few bands that we absolutely cannot leave out of the conversation. Obviously, in our humble opinion, Nirvana is number 1 from the region, because without them, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. But there's one band that's exalted in their hometown of Portland, Oregon, and praised by punks all over the world. They led the charge for Northwest punk music and expanded its musical possibilities. And personally, I don't think Nirvana, or any other band that helped put Northwest rock on the map, would be the same without them. That band is called Wipers.
You think I'm retrospective? I'm someone you used to know. I think it's indecision that leads us to far way to go. But you say it's not that way. Try to make amends to never end.
Wipers were a formative influence on many other bands, like Portland's Poison Idea.
Oh, it's such a shame. You know I feel the pain. I can't stick around while you try to stop.
A couple young punks by the name of Mark Arm and Steve Turner were obsessed with Wipers' second album, Youth of America. A few months after seeing them live in 1984, they formed Green River, a band widely credited with kicking off the entire grunge movement. We told their story in last week's episode on Mudhoney. Wipers was the brainchild of Greg Sage, born and raised in Portland, back when it was considered the dirtiest and most dangerous port city in the world. Sage came of age in the mid-1960s, a time when the city was becoming a progressive hippie enclave. He himself had fallen under the spell of a guitarist whose band played the original Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix.
Music, sweet music. I wish I could caress. Manic depression is a frustrating mess. Wow!
The right-handed Sage was so influenced by Hendrix that he learned how to play guitar left-handed. His father worked in the broadcasting industry, so Sage was already very experienced in working a record-cutting lathe. In a 1983 interview, Sage said he used to record songs off the radio and cut mixes for his friends on vinyl. He was literally cutting records before he even knew how to play music. For decades, Portland was the epicenter of the Northwest pro wrestling scene, and it would become one of the most renowned wrestling territories in the United States. A wrestler by the name of Larry Pitchford used the stage name Beauregard to great success. In fact, Beauregard was such an enormously popular wrestler in Portland that he was able to leverage that notoriety into a recording deal.
My skin is white. My eyes are blue.
Beauregard saw a 17-year-old Greg Sage playing for a friend's band, and the wrestler/musician invited him to play in his album. In 1971, when Sage was still a teenager, he played on Beauregard's self-titled album. If you listen closely, you can hear early signs of the guitarist that Sage would become as the leader of Wipers. His guitar work is a little subtler than the playing he became famous for as a punk musician, but that's because he was essentially just a session guitarist for the charismatic Beauregard. As the saying goes in wrestling, Beauregard's name is on the marquee, so of course he's going to be the one to get the most shine.
Do it when you're young. You can do it when you're old. Do it when you're warm. And you can do it when you're cold.
Sage does a great job as a support guitarist. And to be clear, Beauregard's album is not just a curiosity for Wipers completists. It's a really good album in its own right. 6 years after the Beauregard album, Sage formed Wipers with drummer Sam Henry and bassist Dave Kupal. The name came from his job at a Portland movie theater, washing windows and noticing the clarity of his view of the city when he wiped the glass clean. Sage had a specific concept for Wipers. The band would record and release 15 albums in 10 years without touring or press. He wanted his music to exist as its own thing, to connect with the listener. He didn't want it to be commodified and promoted by the music industry. To me, this ambition makes it evident that from the start, he was invested in the art of recording music rather than any celebrity or financial gain. Sage started a label called Trap Records, where he released the band's first single, Better Off Dead. Not too long after, Wipers recorded and released their watershed debut album, Is This Real?, the first of 3 Wipers albums on Kurt Cobain's famous list. To discuss that monumental full length, here's my man Dusty.
It's hard to put too much stock into a debut record. While it's a great chance to make a first impression, an initial outing comes with some grace. For a lot of bands, it's like, hey, you're just getting started. Don't worry if it's not the greatest yet. There's still time. But then some debuts come out of the gate already approaching perfection. Such is the case with the first Wipers album, Is This Real? Released in 1980, it feels like a missing link in punk's evolution. It exists somewhere between the 70s melodic, bratty tones of the Ramones and Sex Pistols and the grit and ethics of the 80s hardcore punk of Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys. And beyond that, it predicted a sound that would soon emerge in the 90s. I believe they call that ahead of its time. Sage and the band originally self-recorded Is This Real on a 4-track recorder in their practice space with the intention of putting it out on Sage's own Trap Records. These versions of the songs would appear much later on the Wipers box set in 2001. Here's the title track in its original 4-track version.
Sometimes I get these feelings and I don't know what to say. Is it that I don't belong because I really want to stay?
But instead of putting it out on Trap, the band decided to go with Park Avenue Records in hopes of getting wider distribution. But Park Avenue insisted that the band re-record in a professional studio. As much as I personally love the tone of 4-track demo recordings, in retrospect, the decision to go full-fledged studio version feels like the right choice. One thing that's clear listening to both versions, a great song is a great song, no matter where or how it shows up. There are so many moments throughout the album that feel transcendent. Songs like Mystery feel like they could have been a top 40 hit if they were written by a band with more pop sensibilities like the Cars.
You think I'm retrospective of someone you used to know. I think it's indecision that leads us to far way to go. But you say it's not that way. Try to make amends to never end.
Sage's punk bona fides could never be disqualified. But he also didn't shy away from melody. That's part of what makes the whole record feel so thrilling, that he could keep his punk spirit while writing truly catchy music.
Tragedy, oh tragedy, you're such a tragedy, oh tragedy, but don't ever let go, oh no, don't ever let go.
But if you were to ask Greg Sage, the music was never trying to fit any conceived genre. In an interview posted on Xeno Records' website in 2003, Sage recalls, quote, "When we put out Is This Real? It definitely did not fit in. None of our records did. Then 9-10 years later, people are saying, yeah, it's the punk classic of the 80s. And I think in your mind now it is, but when it actually happened, it was far from that. We weren't even really a punk band. See, we were even farther out in left field than the punk movement because we didn't even wish to be classified. And that was kind of a new territory."
It's got to be up front, it's gotta be so close to trust, it's got to be up front, it's gotta be so close to touch, it's got to be up front, be so close to trust, it's got to be up front, it's got to be so close to trust, it's got to be up front, be so close to trust, it's got to be up front, got to be so close to touch, it's got to be up front, be so close to touch, it's got to be up front, got to be so close to trust. Oh, it's such a shame, you no longer feel no pain, I can't stick around while you try to decide.
With some records on Kurt's list, you can kind of draw conclusions on where he might have been influenced. But there are a few cases where the influence is clear. The Pixies are an obvious one. Black Flag, for sure. But I think Wipers are an even clearer case of direct influence. If we look past the fact that, again, Kurt listed 3 Wipers albums in his top 50 of all time, it's also made clear when you hear Nirvana covering songs from this album. There's their version of Return of the Rat. And their cover of D7.
Straight as an arrow. Defect. Not straight, not so straight. Reject. Towards anti-social.
These covers work so well because, well, firstly, Kurt and the band were great musicians, but the songs fit so well with the sound and style Nirvana had developed. Let's take a song like Potential Suicide.
Getting so depressed, 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 getting so depressed.
The churning, low bass, the quiet vocals slowly rising until they peak in a yell. It's all textbook Nirvana, 9 years before they put out their debut record. It's a testament to the influence and importance of Sage in the context of the music that came after. As I said, ahead of his time.
Can't believe my eyes, I can't see so clearly. A thick dark cloud is hanging all about me, suffocating me. Invasion from the outside works its way inward, feeling like a bead of cold ice forming into a chamber of lost illusion.
As a whole, Is This Real exemplifies the shift in focus that punk was taking. Instead of calling out politicians, society, and the decline of Western civilization, the music looks inward. The lyrics are confessional, digging into isolation. Sage sings about feeling like he doesn't belong. This is something Kurt Cobain and others in the Northwest tapped into as well, and a large part of why the 90s alternative rock movement resonated with so many people. It's putting a voice to feelings that are sometimes too dark to share. Hearing someone else talk about their feelings can make us feel less isolated. The track Alien Boy was written about Sage's friend, James Chase, who is schizophrenic. Chase confided in Sage that he often felt like an alien, in this world, but not of this world. The song opens with Sage singing, "Go and grab your guns, you got him on the run, 'cause he's an alien. They hurt what they don't understand." Later he sings, "Got no rights at all." Unfortunately, these words were prophetic. On September 17th, 2006, Chase was beaten down by Portland City police officers. As Willamette Week reported in 2014, the incident all began with a misunderstanding. Chase had been off his medication when police officers confronted him for, quote, doing something suspicious. Afraid, Chase tried to flee before he was beaten and tased by police. Years later, after investigation, it was found that, in fact, Chase had done nothing wrong.
Got him on the run. Go and grab your gun. 'Cause he's an alien boy. Got no rights. No rights at all. Just eat off this.
Chase's story became the focus of the 2013 documentary Alien Boy, The Life and Death of James Chase. The documentarian shared a written quote from Sage that originally appeared on the Wipers website. Sage says, quote, Jim's conversations with me and his powerful sense of vision painted uncanny, powerful visions in my head that had become a huge influence for a few songs that we later recorded for the album Is This Real? The song Alien Boy is one of them. Is This Real already set the stage for a new direction for punk? And more specifically, it planted seeds that would grow into something far bigger in the Northwest music scene. But still, this is just the first of 3 albums that would do that for Kurt. Here's Martin on the band's next big shift with their second album, Youth of America.
Greg Sage's ambition is the primary driving force behind his creative output. So it makes perfect sense that, after a full length of punchy, catchy, visceral punk rock, the centerpiece track of his band's second album would have a running time of nearly 11 minutes.
Youth of America is living in the jungle, fighting for survival, but there's no place to go. Youth of America, the pressure all around, the weapon from the devil was coming down on you. It is time we rectify this now.
Structure aside, the title track of Youth of America is the sort of call to arms against oppressive, hierarchical structures. Where Is This Real looks inward, their next album widens its lens and looks outward at American society. The song Youth of America perfectly articulates the struggles between the haves and the have-nots. The darkness of the band's first album casts a shadow over their second, and Youth of America is pulled, often kicking and screaming, into a bleak future. Case in point, No Fair.
Take a piece of our lives, didn't think that we would care. Everything now is no fair, no fair, no fair, no fair, no fair.
And When It's Over.
We'll be laughing when it's over, when it's over, when it's over, when it's over, when it's over.
Elsewhere on Youth of America are more groove-based songs, like Taking Too Long.
Didn't realize
against the sun, cause it was a sign of the times. What was coming from the sky would never ever change your mind, cause you're taking so long.
And thrilling melodic continuations of the best stuff on Is This Real, like Can This Be? But the legacy of Youth of America is ultimately based on its incredible title track. In an earlier episode, we spoke on the influence that Melvins leader Buzz Osborne had on Kurt Cobain. But if you go further up the chain, Wipers arguably had as profound an influence on the Melvins as the Melvins had on Kurt and Nirvana. Osborne and his band has proved as much through their own cover of Youth of America.
We'll never take it from the right side, down the left side, down the middle till you don't know who you are. Turn around and think it don't really matter. Try to put you 6 feet under the ground. It is time you rectify this now. We got to feel it now.
The importance of Youth of America set the stage for more critical acclaim and even some radio airplay. Here's Dusty on Wipers' third album, Over the Edge.
Over the Edge isn't the final Wipers album. But in terms of this initial trio of albums, it does feel like a climactic finale.
It's not the truth I see. It's just a mockery. Don't need to waste my time. You know I really tried. You take and never give. Make it so hard to live. I'm hanging on a ledge. Push me over the edge.
Released in 1983, the album bridges the gap between its predecessors. It has the looming power of Youth of America with the immediacy and speed of Is This Real? As such, the album saw the band getting as close to a mainstream breakthrough as they would ever get. The singles Romeo and the title track ended up getting moderate, yet sustained airplay on modern rock stations.
Moderate rock.
It also led to the band's first extensive tour across the country. Something that wasn't part of Sage's original vision for the band, but, you know, plans change. While ultimately this didn't lead to a huge breakout moment for the Wipers, the mild commercial success of the record no doubt helped infiltrate the music into the underground. But like we've said several times on this series, success is what you make it. And to my ears, Over the Edge is a triumph.
Living in doom, down, living in doom, down, living in doom, down, living in doom, down.
I'll be real with you. Is this real? Is this real? Is this real? Am I real? Am I real? What is real? Is real? Ooh. I can sit here and try to intellectualize the album for you. And there are plenty of themes touching on alienation, soul-seeking, love, and loss. But what I really want to say is, this album fucking rips.
Play the day as white and black this time. It's gonna change this time. It's gonna change for me, for you.
It's packed with scorchers like This Time and Messenger.
Just a trick of fate. Am I the one you'll use? You got me all choked up. Right through the wind, don't get left behind.
The guitar tone on the intro, So Young, probably inspired a bunch of kids to pick up the instrument and try experimenting. Like Youth of America and Is This Real before it, Over the Edge finds the band working at their prime. If you're Kurt and you're trying to put just one of these records on your favorite of all time list, I can see why you'd feel compelled to put all three of them and call it a day. It's one of the best 3-album runs in rock music.
All the other kids put you down. No one ever wants you around. No one wants an alien. Never thought you could feel. Was never been around. Stand still, but will they ever know?
Kurt's not the only devoted Seattle fan of his time either. The Melvins and Mudhoney both cite Wipers as a huge influence. Soundgarden and eventual Pearl Jam drummer Matt Cameron regularly fronts a Wipers cover band, appropriately called Is This Real? Over the Edge was covered by formerly Portland-based musician Courtney Love and her band Hole. Oh, and she was married to Kurt, too.
It's not the truth I say, it's just a mockery. Don't need to waste my time, you know I really tried. You take and never give, it gets so hard to live. I'm hanging on a ledge, pushed straight over the edge.
The band kept the momentum going with 3 more records in the 80s. They stopped writing in 1989, and Sage would blame music industry frustrations and losing their studio and rehearsal space as key reasons. They wouldn't be gone long, though. Wipers formed again in 1993 and went on until the release of their final album, Power in One, in 1999.
I hope you realize I'll be around. I'll be around here. I'll be around. I'll be around here. I'll be around. I'll be around here. I'll be around. I'll be around here.
The Wipers are no longer active. Sage now lives in Arizona and operates Xeno Records, which continues to evangelize the Wipers catalog. The Wipers' legacy might not be something that's known to all listeners, but most of us have no doubt felt their impact, even if we didn't know it. Sage spent many songs wondering about his reality. Is this real? Am I real? In retrospect, he might be one of the realest to ever do it.
You just heard Wipers, their 3 incredible albums, Is This Real, Youth of America, and Over the Edge. A running joke in this podcast is how I say, oh yeah, my favorite album of all time. But yeah, like legitimately, if I did like a top 25 albums of all time, at least 2 of these albums would be in the top 25, and the third may not be far along after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so fun going through all the records on this list, but I gotta say, it's been especially fun, like, marathoning these 3 together, like, back to back to back. Like, I could see why he would want to put all 3, because it's just, like, such a fun, dynamic, inspiring listen.
Yeah, these albums are just so good. It's so rich musically. I mean, I've probably listened to all 3 of these albums combined at least 1,000 times. And yeah, going over them this time around, like, there was still new stuff that I was finding, listening to, like, oh, I don't think I've ever heard that before, which I think is so incredible when music does that.
Absolutely. It's been fun to listen to these because, you know, this month we're going through all these, like, Northwest records, and it's fun to, you know, last week we did Mudhoney, and that's turning our attention towards Portland for a minute. And I think a lot of times when people talk about the Northwest, maybe I'm making an assumption here, but they're talking about grunge and Seattle. But the Northwest as a whole, as you know, KEXP defines it as like Oregon, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Idaho a little bit. And I love that definition because these music scenes really do feed into each other. And Portland has such a strong identity with not just Wipers, but a whole multitude of influential punk bands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're going to talk about peers of the Wipers, bands like Neo Boys and Dead Moon, two incredible bands that helped build this foundation of Northwest punk music and helped take it to astronomical heights.
Yeah. Shout out to the Exploding Hearts, a mutual loved band between Martin and I from the 2000s era. Even like, Heat Miser with Elliott Smith, Alien Boy, who's more modern, but they're named literally after a Wipers song. I deeply love the Portland music scene, and the Wipers were just such like a foundation of all of that.
Yeah. When I think about contemporary Portland punk bands, I think about Nick Normal and Cut Piece, who are just kick-ass punk bands. And it's so cool to see the legacy of punk music be continued on. We're talking 40 years after the Wipers put out albums.
Definitely. And, not just influential like within the Northwest scene, but obviously there's this like wider influence the Wipers have had. I mean, Greg Sage is just his work ethic and ethos, not unlike maybe like a Steve Albini or something, where it's like ethics first, wanting to go against the careerism, but also, musically influential too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about bands that have clearly put their Wipers influence on the table, like No Age and Vivian Girls, two of my favorite contemporary punk bands. And I've seen the Texas punk band, the Markmen, twice in the past 8 months. And every time I hear a little something that's like, oh, that reminds me of something off of Is This Real? So, yeah, Wipers have a far-reaching influence as far as the world of punk music. And it's so cool that people are talking about it. I feel as though, like, prior to Kurt giving credit to Wipers for unwittingly creating the grunge sound, like, people didn't really talk about them. And there was like this period where it seemed like a lot of influence was driven from elsewhere, but then, things come full circle and people started talking about Wipers again and sounding like Wipers in their songs, and now their DNA is everywhere in the punk scene.
Yeah, it's funny. I think the last episode you mentioned something about not considering Nirvana a grunge band, and I totally agree with you. I don't know if that's like a hot take, but we're at least on the same page. And when you listen to the Wipers, I mean, Nirvana covers many of these songs, like D7, Return of the Rat, but I see much closer relation between Nirvana and Wipers than a lot of the grunge bands that they were contemporaries with. Like Greg Sage's like embracement of melody and the way he produces his vocals. Like there's a song Potential Suicide on Is This Real? Like that's a Nirvana song. It's a Wipers song, obviously, but like when I listen to it, this basically created Nirvana. And now that heritage of the Wipers passed down through Nirvana to more bands who probably didn't even know it came from the Wipers is just really cool to see. Yeah,
that was definitely a big bang moment for Nirvana, it seems. I mean, everything is, clearer in hindsight, as they say, but listening to it, it definitely feels like a big bang where you can almost visualize Kurt hearing Potential Suicide and having like an epiphany and saying, this is it. This is what I want my band to sound like. Yes. And yeah, speaking of like big bang, I don't even want to say, I was going to say Big Bang Theory.
Shout out to young Sheldon.
But going back to like big flashpoints in the quote unquote Seattle sound or grunge or whatever you want to call it, there's this theory that I've been thinking about, especially since the passing of Steve Albini and researching this album and going back to listening to Black Flag's My War. And it's that if I could boil down the three biggest moments that influenced the grunge scene, it would have to be Black Flag playing side 2 of My War in Seattle, because a lot of bands talk about that. Big Black's final show, shout out to Steve Albini, may he rest in peace. That was also in Seattle, Big Black's last show in your neighborhood of Georgetown.
Yeah, the Georgetown Steam Plant.
Yeah. And the third is from Is This Real, which is the first half of D7, like that really slow, sludgy, kind of depressing guitar figure. And just how everything comes together in the first half of that song, that is a grunge song.
Yeah, definitely. I was, like I've mentioned a couple times, With the Lights Out box set was a pretty big document for me. And I've been revisiting it a lot lately. And I didn't even realize Return of the Rat and D7 were covers originally. Because it just sounded like, okay, this is just some Nirvana song I didn't know. And then when you go back to the Wipers and you're like, oh, wait, what? Like that was totally blew my mind. It's like finding out that Natalie what's her name? Natalie Imbruglia.
Yeah.
That song Torn is a cover of like some Swedish song.
Yeah, that was crazy when I figured that out. Yeah. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, funny comparison, but yeah, it's like, wow, this is so Nirvana to me. Yeah, it's great.
You know, we've been talking about these 3 albums, and it brings to mind the notion of a trilogy.
I love a good unofficial trilogy. Like sure, like a Star Wars is great, but like especially in music, a perfect like 3-record run, something like a complete discography is great, but like a 3-record run just hits a spot for me. Nirvana has one of those, of course. The Wipers we're talking about, but I don't know, what are some of your favorite like unofficial trilogies in music?
Man, I mean, I think back to the first episode of the Cobain 50, The Stooges, like those first 3 albums, The Stooges self-titled, Funhouse, Raw Power. Oh man, that's, as far as rock and roll goes, that's a perfect 3-album set. What else? This might be a reach for some people, but I feel as though Sonic Youth had a great trilogy in Bad Moon Rising, Evil, and Sister, because those were like 3 very high concept albums that showed the evolution of Sonic Youth before they hit Daydream Nation, which is, you know, their most celebrated album.
Right.
Most certainly. And what else? The first 3 Silver Jews records, those are incredible. Silver Jews, one of my favorite bands. Also, another favorite of mine, Ty Segall, he put out 3 albums in 2012. He did Hair with White Fence. He did Slaughterhouse, which is an incredible record, and Twins, which I feel is a phenomenal studio record that kind of gets overlooked by the other albums that he put out the same year.
Yeah, that clip of putting out 3 A+ records in the same year is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, I would say My Bloody Valentine, where they had a great trio of records. It was like 30 years spread between them. Obviously the first 2, Loveless being like the centerpiece, and then MBV coming out so much later and being that good was a welcome surprise. Some more recent ones, Eve's Tumor, I think just finished a great, phenomenal run. That's I don't think they get enough credit for how good of an artist they are.
Yeah. Eve's Tumor, I think they might be the last real rock star.
100,000, 10,000% agree. There's no one doing it like Eve's anymore. And then J-Som, I'm a huge J-Som like fanboy. I think she has a perfect trilogy. I cannot wait for a 4th one. And then we mentioned him last time, Kendrick Lamar. I feel like he has a great trilogy, going from Good Kid, Mad City to Pimp a Butterfly to Damn. With respect to the albums before and after that, just those 3 feel just that's such a remarkable run to experience in real time.
I mean, I'm such a big fan of Section 80 that I don't know if I can get with that all the way, because
Sure.
my Kendrick trilogy would be Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I see what you're doing though.
I'm not mad at that either. I think any way you want to cut that cake is totally
Yeah.
fine with me. And I even like Mr. Morale, but I wouldn't say it's the strongest. But that's a digression. This piece was produced by myself, Dusty Henry, and my wonderful colleague, friend, Martin Douglas. Audio is mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Our podcast manager is Isabel Khalili. Larry Mizell Jr. is our director of editorial.
Also, I would be remiss to not bring up the fact that we are a public radio station, a nonprofit radio station. We would love to accept your donation. We cannot operate without the donations of our listeners. Whatever you can give, if you want to be an amplifier, that's cool. If you can only give $5, equally as cool. We greatly appreciate your contributions. And this week we are doing our annual one-day summer drive on Friday, and that would be a perfect opportunity to donate if you feel so inclined. I mean, your donations are always appreciated, but if we're doing a summer drive, you might as well chip in if you can.
Well, with that, I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters. I mean, the beef has cooled down, but like, not like Us is the number one single in the world right now. So
Could you imagine like being the target of the number one song in the world?